بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسعدني أن أرحب بكم في الجلسة الثالثة.
I'm pleased to welcome you to the third and last session of this first day, where we'll talk about the social transformations, and we thank the Center for organizing this event, the development and making the changes, and it studies that through 4 papers. The second element is the role, the language change and its effect on Arabic language. Maran Kamrava, Ali Alraouf, his colleague Adil Ali couldn't come, Danya Zafar and Dr. Qasim Shaban. The first paper, From Urban Spaces to Global Cities, Assessing the New Port Cities of the Gulf by Dr. Mehran Kamrava. He is from Georgetown University in Qatar. He has the PhD from Cambridge and has
inside the Arab states,
wide expertise.
Waters and security in the Persian Gulf. Now, is it Persian or Arabian? That's a different question. Please, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me start by thanking the Doha Institute and the Arab Center for Policy and Research for this honor. I've been here a number of years and have had the honor of presenting at this conference, and it's always a terrific honor to be here. In the remaining 30 minutes or so that I have with you, I wanted to very quickly talk about the cities that we see around us. And one of the questions that is often asked is, what do these cities mean? Doha, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi. And in fact, on the way here, for the local ones, or for those of you who've been around, I just drove through Lusail, which is a city literally being built. It's a city that is being built into the sea, into the sky, and of course into the desert. And so in this sense, what I have tried to do is to make sense of these urban spaces that are growing up and down the Gulf. And I've been asking myself for the last several years, what do these cities mean? What do they signify, and what is their significance? So I want to share with you some thoughts, some preliminary thoughts that I've been thinking through, and just kind of seeing whether or not these cities, what they mean both for themselves, in themselves, and in the context of the region and beyond the region globally. And one of the things that I realized is that one of the questions that I ask myself is, do these cities work? Do they work? And to understand and answer this question, whether or not these cities work, Doha, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi, are they white elephants? Are they empty shells? Or are they actual cities? I thought that it would be best to look at it from 3 perspectives. Look at these cities at the global level, at the regional level, and at a global level. What do these cities mean locally to the people who live there? What do they mean regionally in terms of 5-hour flight radius, let's say from, for example, Rabat in the west to New Delhi, or cities in India in the east, and then, of course, in relation to the rest of the world. Are they global cities or not? And this is what I think in terms of whether or not they work. Yes, they do. They're livable cities for people who live there. And in a minute, I'll elaborate on what I mean by that. But when we look at the significance of these cities regionally, the verdict is a little mixed. They are in many ways and in many respects regional hubs. They're regional hubs for a number of sectors and segments, but we cannot yet say they are regional capitals. You might remember that a couple of years ago this was a very hot discussion whether or not the Gulf region has emerged as the new capital of the Middle East. And the jury is a little less decided on whether or not these are global cities. I maintain that if we apply a definition of a global city that is common and commonly accepted, by all accounts, really Dubai might come closest, and Doha and Abu Dhabi have some ways to go. So let me elaborate on this very quickly, beginning with whether or not they are livable spaces. First, the example of Lusail that I mentioned, and for those of you who are from Oman or Kuwait, there are other examples. We know that there's been tremendous urban growth in recent years. There's been this hyper-urbanism that has expanded radically and rapidly. When I first came here 11 years ago, I had buildings as landmarks for direction to find my way from one place to another. And of course, quickly I realized that you couldn't do that. Now, this hyper-urbanism is no longer, at least after the 1980s, driven by urban planning. Instead, in fact, it's driven by commercial interests. It's driven by commercial interests that are geared at consumers. This is geared at predominantly Western consumers, attracting expats, Western expats, but also, of course, making these cities attractive to local populations, making these cities attractive to the national population. And of course, this commercial endeavor, the consumerism and the hypergrowth, is being led by members that are either part of the ruling family or are in close commercial and economic alliance with the ruling family. Probably the best example of the urban planner is the ruler of Dubai, for whom Dubai is growing rapidly and his own commercial interests are vested in it. And I think if you look outside of Dubai, you will see examples again and again of people either within the ruling inner circle or with extremely close ties with the ruling family, in which they are driving commercial planning. And in fact, the planning department in the city, in the municipality, which used to be extremely consequential into the 1980s, is no longer active. And it's instead this liberal consumerism aimed at a Western audience, places like Villaggio, The Pearl, Landmark. These names, of course, are very telling. These are commercially driven, and it is part of a ruling bargain in which either members of the ruling family or the merchant classes closely tied to the ruling family are benefiting from this urban development. Now, continuing with the contemporary Gulf city, let me just show you a quick snapshot of what a typical Gulf city looks like. This could be a map of either Doha or Kuwait City or Dubai, where we have the center in gray, and around it the new city has grown. This map, incidentally, is readily available. I didn't put the source here, but it's from a famous book by Florian Wiedmann on Doha. And so that you see the reclaimed land. This reclaimed development is again part of this commercially driven urban development, which in many ways those in the ruling inner circle benefit from. You have the commercial business district in red, the suburbs and of course, around it is the transitional zone in which you have both residences as well as small businesses and other parts. And then beginning in the 1990s, we have towers. And these towers, again, are those prime examples of this commercially driven. They have nothing to do with the local architecture, nothing to do with local history, but they're appealing, they're glitzy, they look nice, and of course, there's a lot of money to be made in building them, and you see that those are on the edges of the city, oftentimes in areas that have been reclaimed. So this is a typical Gulf city, and what it looks like. Now, in terms of livable spaces, these are livable spaces, particularly for the people who live there. The population of these cities, in the broadest terms, can be divided into two groups. First, of course, you have nationals, which are part of a ruling bargain which the state really takes care of. And then, of course, you have the expats. And we know that there are, again, at the broadest level, we have three categories of expatriates. These categories are problematic, they're fluid, they're changeable, but we have the so-called skilled, high-income expats, many of whom live in either the suburbs or in the towers. We have the middle classes that are oftentimes employed in services sector, and of course there are the unskilled or low-skilled expats. Now, for all of these, what in local parlance, what in everyday parlance is called migrant labor, although all the expats are migrant workers, technically. So for all of these categories, whether nationals or expats, or whether high-skilled, low-skilled, or semi-skilled, these cities work. They are livable spaces. This is not necessarily talking about their working conditions. This is talking about their living conditions. And in fact, there have been studies done by someone who's also involved here at the Doha Institute, and by colleagues at Qatar University, that have specifically asked people about their living conditions. And without exception, all categories of expatriates report that their living conditions have improved compared to what they were in their home countries when they moved here. Whether you are unskilled and live in a room with 20 other migrant workers, or you are part of a high-income expat family that lives in a high-rise, everybody reports that their living conditions have actually improved to what they were, whether it is in terms of safety or hygiene or living standards or the amenities at their disposal. So, in one way or another, these cities work. Now, let's look at them at the regional level. Are these regional, what do these cities mean in terms of the Middle East and South Asia? And when I talk about the region, again, I'm not just talking about the Middle East, but think about East as well, the East. Now, you know that in 2013, there was a robust scholarly debate as to whether or not these cities are the new capitals of the Middle East. This was started by Sultan Al-Qasimi in Dubai, and he said these are the new capitals. And the reaction was ferocious to Sultan Al-Qasimi's discussion of these cities as the new capitals. And someone said quite rudely, one Western or one Arab scholar in the West said, just because you have a preponderance of Lebanese singers doesn't mean you're the new capital of the Middle East. Now, these cities may not necessarily be regional capitals, but if we look, they're actually regional hubs. Now, I don't know if you can see, because it's, I don't know if you can see all the categories, but if we look at science and culture, logistics, and services, the three broad categories of science and culture, logistics, and services, we see that there are indeed areas, in which these cities are regional hubs. When it comes to transportation, of course they're regional hubs. When it comes to medical tourism, Dubai is a regional hub. When it comes to banking and finance, they're regional hubs. None of the traditional regional capitals, Cairo, of course, unfortunately, Damascus and Baghdad, you can't talk about them as regional capitals anymore. But none of them compare, whereas in many areas, these cities compare insofar as being regional capitals are concerned. And of course, universities, we see that Doha and Abu Dhabi have again emerged as regional capital in terms of museums, air transport, and again, banking and finance. Now, last, let's see if these are global cities. Are these indeed global cities, or are they more accurately aspiring global cities? Are they cities that are global? And let's begin with a definition of a global city. There's a lot of definitions of a global city that are out there. I'll just share with you what is probably the most common definition, which was offered by Saskia Sassen. And Saskia Sassen sees three definitions or three criteria for a city to be global. First, they are the command points in the organization of a global economy. Now, on that score, these cities probably fit: Doha, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi. But they're also key locations and marketplaces for leading industries of the current period, whatever the industry is in that current period, and finance and specialized services and firms. Now, there we don't necessarily see the second criteria applying to Doha, for example, in many respects. And what really doesn't apply is global cities being centers of production. Doha is not a center of production. Abu Dhabi is not a center of production. You might argue that Dubai is a center of production in some respects, but certainly Doha and Abu Dhabi have a long way to go. So, in terms of whether or not these cities are aspiring and are they global cities, I think we can argue that certainly Dubai is a global city in some respects, but when it comes to Abu Dhabi and Doha, those are best aspiring cities. So let me end with the early question, the first question that I started with. I know I said I'm going to end. Again, at the local level, these are livable spaces. At the as regional hubs, they are hubs but not capitals. In most respects, but not all aspects of their functions. And in terms of global cities, they're really aspiring rather than actual global cities. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mehran. It's a very interesting presentation. متحدثنا الثاني
The next
دكتور
speaker,
علي
second
عبد
speaker,
الرؤوف.
Dr. Ali Abdurraouf.
ورقته بعنوان
His paper
الخليجية المعاصرة.
is about the modern GCC city from the particular to the general. He's a university professor, architect. He's also coordinator of a capability built in Qatar. Professor in HEBQ University in Qatar. His researches focus on modern GCC cities and also the vacuum in Arab Spring cities. He has a number of publications. The floor is yours. You have
شرف كبير لي أن أكون بين البانل المتميز وأيضا
the speakers and among the panelists, and a big guest here, the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. Like to thank also my colleague for her contribution. Can you please keep closer to the microphone? The Scientific Commission skipped a part of the topic, and that made me sad. But at the end of the day, I found out that they were right to do that. So how can we have a title which is beyond the identity? So please bear with me. I'm not going to talk about the identity, but beyond the identity. We want to go outside the frame of the emotional dimension of shaping identity, especially the Orientalistic dimension. I'm very careful also to go out the prototype, outside of the prototype or stereotype of the GCC society, the rich society. And the best description we can use for the modern GCC city is an explored city, a moving city, an evolving and developing city every day. And these cities have a historical depth, and we look back how they were established before. They were fisher villages, and of course they are very much related to historical and social values. There is a narrative which is describing the development of these cities. Abdurrahman Munayef talks about the depth of the social and financial and economic change, and how the city in a very short time changed a lot. And this brings us to a question: was the GCC society able to move and change from a fishing society into an oil-based society, oil-based revenue society? And a society which is characterized by the financial dimension. He further speaks about the activity, the high activity of GCC societies and GCC countries. There was another version of the events. It's a novel called Tsunami, and this is a diagnostic of or a sad diagnostic of the situation of GCC area. In the first pages, this novel provides a flashback of the GCC area in 2195, which means after more than 100 years from now. The novel starts describing a painful situation. The GCC citizens stand in a queue waiting for their turn to get a visa to travel to Bangladesh to work as drivers. So the question: are we ready for the post-oil era? After oil vanishes or disappears, what are our options and our alternatives? Are we going to allow our citizens to queue up in front of the embassy of Bangladesh to wait for a visa? So I think that the post-era, the post-oil era is something we already see, and we see that the oil prices collapse, and this is already an index signal that we need to do something. Let us look what technology is doing. The first solar plane, solar energy plane, and it had already its first trip from Muscat, from Abu Dhabi to Muscat. It took about 6 hours, but we believe in the power of technology. But after 5 or 10 years, we might have like half an hour or 1 hour, and that will be similar to Qatar Airways or to any other carrier. So let's go back again to the post-oil era. This is something which has become a reality, and there is a need for an effort to look at the post-oil era in these cities. So we talk here about a multi-dimensional battle. What's going to be the future of GCC cities. I think that there is an unclear identity. What do we mean by identity actually? Global, Islamic, Arabic, GCC identity. Which kind of identity do we want? And also the oil revenue, which is shrinking tremendously, and also there are a lot of signals and questions that we see everywhere in the GCC cities. All the centers are decreasing. There's a big contradiction in expressing identity, and also the relationship between the human being and his environment. We have an increase in part of population which is living here only for a short time, and we talk about the GCC area as a homogeneous area, but we forget that there are differences even between villages, cultural differences, social differences, and disparities. So we cannot deal with the GCC area as one unit. Also, our spaces turned out to be areas of towers and gated communities. GCC cities are also characterized by a special phenomenon, which is punishment. When they build towers, we say it's not suitable. When they're built in a museum, it's not convenient. When they're building universities, we'll tell them you don't have the will to bring about an educational revolution. So the GCC area is always confronted to a wave of criticism without having the necessary alternative. The map in front of you has two parts. This is Doha in 1937, 1940. This is the Doha, which is in this square in white. So this is the level of development of the city in 60 or 70 years. This is unprecedented. This is another area. If you know Doha very well, this is the area of Sheraton, and within 2 to 3 decades, we witnessed a huge development. This increase in development makes us make a stop and think deeply. There was a quick wave of construction. Are we moving in the right direction? Does this development reflect our needs? In the studies I conducted with Hadil, we noticed in the last decade we found 3 paradigms. The first one is trying to follow the Dubai example. The second is looking for sustainable development without getting really in depth of development. So it's, and the third issue, the third paradigm is the transformation from clientelism economy to knowledge-based economy. So Dubai developed tremendously because there was an aspiration to go for a huge real estate development and investment, and the city is using its real estate power to have influence outside Dubai. But the danger of Dubai's example actually established this big lie, and instead of posing the right questions, the cities started competing to be like Dubai. And on the eve of the inauguration of Dubai Burj or Burj Khalifa, Khalifa Tower, Al-Walid ibn Talal said that he wants to build something higher. And some election candidates said, if you elect me, I'm gonna choose change your city and make it like Dubai. So Dubai has become an example of modernity and an example of development. So when we compare the different campaigns for comparing all these elements, so you see the difference between the pictures on the left side and those on the right side, moving from white and black. This means here, as you can see, the comeback of the fishermen after a long time of diving. You see the sensitivity of the relation between the cities and the Gulf. And here on the other side, the colorful pictures reflect the culture of consumption. And here, after we fall in a crisis, the same experts and specialists who advise us to build towers, they are laughing at us after the consequences of the financial crisis in 2008. There is also another problem also, especially in the last year, the collapse of the collective spirit and the domination of individualism, especially after the Arab Spring. I think this is something international to destroy collective space or public space, which is actually the foundation through which society can express themselves.
أو أن تحدث بدايات راقصة لطيفة جدا تنتهي هذه البدايات إلى أن بلد تمثل مكون مؤسس للخليج تتحول إلى عدو.
And sometimes we see a country which is actually one of the founding powers of the GCC Council becomes an enemy for some of the neighboring countries. Actually, we need to go beyond this situation, and we need to go back to reality. We cannot have a minister for tolerance and minister for happiness. At the same time, you have a researcher who was sentenced for life imprisonment, and afterwards there was an amnesty within a very short time. So how can this be in conformity with the Ministry of Tolerance and the Ministry of Happiness? Also, our identity, our Islamic identity, has undergone a difficult test. The embassy of USA was transferred to Jerusalem, and the reaction was not as expected. So we lost a lot of our values. The question, do we still have the same Islamic identity? Apart from that, there are a lot of concerns domestically. Here in the GCC area, we are always in a kind of domestic struggle. Shall we accept the other or no? Shall we accept expat or no? As long as this battle is still going on, there will never be a stability at the level of identity and the depth we need to see. We see a lot of caricatures portraying the labor and the expats as a threat, and they are draining the wealth and richness of the countries of the GCC area. The notion of sustainable development should go beyond environmental dimensions and should go to social dimensions. The beautiful views and the beautiful areas different expats are residing is only one example. Identity might turn out to be a trap if we don't know how to deal with it, because I think that identity is our biggest problem is that we look at identity as a product and not as a process. It's an operation. what's going on actually in GCC cities is something we need to add to this identity. And the other thing is the transformation into a knowledge-based economy. And this is, of course, changing the definition of identity. And the creative class does not care about its place of birth, but it cares more about the environment which is encouraging it for production, and also urbanization. And this is actually the topic of my last or recent book. The new urbanization should strike a balance between tradition and modernity. Urbanization of the post-oil era should be friendly to the human being and should take into consideration the civilizational dimension, and also the identity should be related to all historical eras. Also, everything we are doing in Doha, all these study centers, and among them also the center in which we are now, is an added value to this city, and also building different cultural institutions and museums. The question we need to pose: how can we reach a productive interaction between the human being and all these cultural institutions? The same applies to the new museum, and also the social texture and structure, and the strength of this social texture is very important. To conclude this presentation, I want to provide you this following thought. We need to go beyond the identity and defining the identity. We need to go beyond the identity and what are the options and alternatives. We need to talk about the multi-facial cultures. Thank you.
I enjoyed personally this presentation. The third paper
وتقدمها الأستاذة دانيا ظافر، وهي باحثة
Pre
بالاقتصاد
and Post
السياسي في
Oil
الخليج
Discovery,
العربية،
Gulf
وتعمل
Merchant
مديرة
Families
تدريبية في منتدى
and
الدول في
Institutional
واشنطن.
Development.
عملت سابقا في جامعة الدفاع الوطني.
She worked in National Defense University about the Middle East, and she was an economic researcher, and she published many studies and papers, and contributed in writing a book.
تفضلي دكتورة. دكتورة هي طالبة دكتوراه في نفس الوقت، فناديها دكتورة خلاص نختصر.
Thank you. Is this working? Can you hear me?
You need to press.
Sorry. Yes, I guess since they already call me Doctora, there's no reason to graduate. Thank you, Doctora, for the kind introduction. I had the chance to moderate her presentation in Washington, and now she's moderating mine. I didn't set an alarm for hers, though. I also wanted to take the chance to thank the Arab Center for the invitation to a much-needed, thought-provoking forum on the Gulf region. The emergence of the Gulf's rentier economies coincided with a process of state formation that, since their inception, has caused the Gulf states to have certain distributive characteristics. This pathway of development has caused a stickiness of certain institutional arrangements that were crystallized at the critical juncture of the shift from the pre-oil era to the post-oil era. The question that I would like to address today is, how has the strength or weakness of merchant coalitions during the pre-oil era in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar affected the trajectory of institutional development? One critical period that led up to the discovery of oil is the pearl trading era before the 1930s. It set important precedents for development pathways in the Gulf for two reasons. First, the interplay between the merchants and the state placed the development trajectories of critical state institutions. Second, the period of the pearl crash is the best indicator in Gulf history to mirror a crash how a crash would look like for an economy predominantly dependent on one source. In evaluating the three cases, there were three main factors that influenced institutional development. One striking factor is the diversification of trade due to their geostrategic locations in the pre-oil era. The second one is British involvement in domestic politics. And the third is the interplay between revenue extraction apparatuses and main players of revenue producers. The common thread among all three of these variables is the role that the merchants played in the outcome, the trajectory of institutional development. It's important to note, not all merchants were equal. The more dependent the merchants were on pearling, the less power they had in the political economy following the industry's crash. This has significant implications. A factor that distinguished Kuwait from Qatar and Bahrain is that its merchants have historically been and currently remain a stronghold in its politics. This can be partly credited to the fact that Kuwait had a trade economy that was less dependent on the pearling industry. It has a more diversified trade economy than those of Bahrain and Qatar. Hence, the merchants had a more profound influence on domestic politics. Actually, as a result of merchant demands, the social contract of rentierism was formed to hedge against dynastic rule. The merchants of Kuwait benefited from their strategic location for three reasons. Kuwait's port was situated in, between two main ports, the one of Basra in Iraq and Bushehr in Iran, and the trade route of caravans traveling to and from Aleppo and Baghdad. What is unique about Kuwait's ports is that it was outside the control of the tariff boundaries of the Ottomans. Together, all of these factors set Kuwait being a destination for trade. It connected the merchants to networks throughout the region, consequently giving them an outsized influence relative to their neighbors. In the pre-oil era, the domestic politics of Kuwait remained consultative, largely due to the influence held by the merchants. In the pearling area, the level of consultative relationships did decrease when Mubarak al-Sabah, commonly referred to as Mubarak the Great, consolidated power. Yet the merchants managed to stronghold him to secure favorable policies. To exemplify this, in protest to Sheikh Mubarak's tax policy, the merchants left Bahrain and forced Sheikh Mubarak to personally get them back to return, which is very unique. Although setting up a formal taxation system in Kuwait institutionalized the extraction of money for the government, the merchants were able to set their terms due to their economic power. Their relationship with the sheikhs prompted the state to create institutions, but there were also some that were solely merchant initiated that pushed their interest. For example, they created the Kuwait municipality in 1930, which was actually an elected body led by the merchants and played a role in domestic politics. Another important creation for the merchants was the education system, which they actually in the early 1900s, education just focused mainly on religious studies. And the merchants decided to create and expand the curriculum. Therefore, they raised funds privately and established the first official school in Kuwait, which was in 1912. It's in Barkia School. It was actually strategically named after Sheikh Mubarak, but really controlled by the merchants. They also established an education council to supervise and develop the school system. And they did the same for the health system as well. Through these institutions, the merchants of Kuwait lobbied their interest, a movement that was significant in setting a precedent for institutional development across the Gulf was the 1938 movement coined as the Majlis movement. The emergence of this movement across the Gulf has been portrayed as a reaction to the merchants' fear of losing influence in the wake of the discovery of oil in 1938. Upon this realization, the merchants made their demands, arguing that revenues from oil should be earmarked for development rather than wastefully becoming income for just the sheikhs. The concept of rentierism and existing social contract emerges here, I believe this is a critical juncture for the establishment of the existing social contract. In the 1938 movement, the merchants organized politically through the very institutions that they helped to establish. They leveraged their newly established Education Council and the Kuwait municipality to push for a legislative assembly. They were able to establish a short-lived majlis that quickly fell apart due to the sudden shifting alliances with the British from the merchants to the sheikhs. During the 1938 movement, originally, the merchants managed to ally themselves with both the British and the local dissidents, isolating the rulers and initiating elections for a majlis. Majlis is like a legislative body, just to translate. However, the 1938 National Assembly was short-lived as the British withdrew their support and the sheikhs got together and consolidated their power into a dynastic monarchy and closed the Majlis in 1939. This was incredibly important in the political moment of Kuwait because you see the shift to a dynastic rule where the family tried to hold on to different institutions of power. And arguably, I think this influenced the whole Gulf region, in my humble opinion. Also, it is important to highlight one key dissident that allied himself with the merchants was Sheikh Abdullah Salim, who later in 1950 became the emir and under his rule established the first National Assembly in 1963, which is in existence today. Meanwhile, the merchants' changes implemented in the window of opportunity that occurred at the forefront of oil's discovery cannot be ignored. They set a precedent by creating the first Kuwaiti political bloc, the National Bloc. Today, there are many different blocs in Kuwaiti politics, as you know. The bloc restructured the tax system, introduced public health regulations, opened schools, reformed the judicial system, and began building the modern Kuwait. Kuwait politics has never been the same since then. As for Bahrain, of all the Gulf ports, Bahrain had the most important and active pearl trading port in the pre-oil era. This allowed the pearl trading merchants to be a powerful segment within Bahraini society. The tribal merchants, mainly in the pearling industry, held power and at times even challenged the states. They had great autonomy and established vertical integration of the industry, including insourcing security. While the urban merchants were highly susceptible to the state and its decisions, that relationship actually flipped later. The same element that gave the tribal merchants their strength also proved to be their greatest weakness. In the 1930s, the pearl industry crashed and they quickly fell out of power. Amidst the implosion of the pearl industry, the urban merchants, many of whom were pearl traders, but also landlords and money lenders, were able to weather the transition due to their more diverse income sources. Although the urban merchants, unlike the tribal ones, were not as autonomous and were unable to evade taxation, through the payments of taxation, they became more empowered. They found opportunities in state-created institutions to lobby their interests. The change in this economic context caused a redistribution of power and allowed for the expansion of bureaucratic apparatuses. Like Kuwait, to a certain degree, through state institutions such as the municipal councils, the merchants of Bahrain contested power. In this context, the urban merchants obtained control of the municipal council and were able to increase their influence. The council allowed for the merchants to protect their investments and hedge themselves against the harsh economic climate of the 1930s. The Majlis movement, which spread from Kuwait, had a domino effect across the Gulf and was adopted by the urban merchants in Bahrain. It was through this movement that the merchants lobbied for the creation of a council of elites, which again is like a legislative body, in order to increase their influence on the state. However, in the end, the Bahraini merchants were not able to establish their legislative assembly until 1973, which got dissolved in 1975, and then was reinstituted in 2002. Similar to Kuwait, but to a greater extent, One factor that caused Bahrain's failure to create a consultative majlis from the other Gulf states was the heightened British involvement in the island's internal politics. Charles Belgrave, a political agent of the British, had a direct hand in shaping state leadership and the development of Bahraini institutions. He saw it against the British's interest to allow the creation of any entity that would be equivalent to a parliament. Arguably, had it not been for the British, it is highly likely that Bahrain's National Assembly would have been first founded in the 1930s. The case of Qatar differed from Kuwait and Bahrain in that there was very little diversification from the pearling industry. This had a domino effect on the economy's institutional development in the pre and post eras. The location of Qatar lacked the strategic advantages of Bahrain and Kuwait, and due to that, there was actually, the merchants never really developed a strong coalition. Additionally, there were other factors that affected them, like in 1783, some of the main players, some of the main merchants left to Bahrain for political reasons. Also, unlike Bahrain, Qatar didn't have a debt system where the pearl divers were in debt to the merchants, so the merchants didn't have that level of power and leverage. Another distinction when compared to the other two countries is the revenues, the government revenues were rooted in the pearl industry with less emphasis as the merchants as brokers. In this context, they had, the merchants had lower bargaining power and they were greatly weakened. And there was actually no Majlis movement in Qatar, which ironically, it didn't happen in Qatar, but it did happen in Kuwait and Bahrain. The fact that the merchants were unable to create a bloc to negotiate with the rulers and that the leadership did not consolidate power through a taxation mechanism that could independently support the government meant that Qatar could make little progress in institutional development prior to the discovery of oil. And it's interesting to note that the British didn't have a strong involvement in Qatar until 1950, and that's when the institutional development process happened. Today, not only is the social contract affected by the relationship sealed on the eve of oil, but also the institutions that affect the trajectory of private sector development. The existence of a strong merchant class in the pre-oil era had grave implications for economic development trajectories. Today, Kuwait's merchants are strong and control a large part of the private sector, even though I believe the government is still stronger. Qatar, on the other hand, has a government enterprise-based economy, whereas Bahrain is on the brink of reaching its status after the pearl industry crash, where the autonomous pearl merchants were facing the same challenge as the Bahraini government today as resources are running out. I know they discovered oil, but that hasn't come into fruition yet. Okay, the Bahraini government dependent on oil wealth has now turned to the business elite. And actually, if you look at the Chamber of Commerce now, the business elite, they actually competed very viciously to get those seats because they know that it's their turn. In the pre-oil era, Kuwait had the most diversified economy and Qatar the least, while Bahrain was in the middle. It is indisputable that their geostrategic location was a defining factor correlating with their respective levels of trade diversification. Similar to their level of diversification, there was an identical trend in the merchants' level of power as a political bloc. Another striking relationship appears when you evaluate these parliaments, which are vital institutions for legislation on economic development, with the level of power they have relative to the level of power the merchants held in the pre-oil era. There is a clear trend in how the consultative relationship is driven by merchants reflects in their respective legislative bodies. Kuwait's merchants were on the forefront of creating institutions critical to state formation. I'm almost done. Before the discovery of oil, such as establishing an education system, healthcare, and distributive apparatuses. Yet commonly, it is identified that Kuwait's current state is also receding in its institutional development. Today, it is evident that the merchants have a heavier hand in private sector development in Kuwait, while in Qatar, their development is more dependent on government enterprise, which is arguably more efficient in the case of Gulf economies. I'm going to go to my concluding points. In conclusion, dissecting all of this, there are key trends that can be derived here about how merchants set precedents for existing institutions. Where merchants exited, a different political economy emerged. That is reflected today, also evidenced in the legislative bodies. The merchant demands for oil wealth to be shared with the population set precedents for the social contract of today's Gulf frontier economies. The reaction of the interplay between the merchant and the government led to the establishment of dynastic leadership across the Gulf. And the Pearl Crash era offers critical insights with regards to the importance of economic diversification and the interplay of key players in the post-oil era. Thank you.
Thank you, Dania, for a very informative presentation. متحدثنا الرابع
Our
دكتور قاسم شعبان
fourth speaker,
أستاذ
Dr.
اللغويات
Qasim
التطبيقية في قسم اللغة الإنجليزية
شعبان,
بالجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت.
is a linguist in
تشمل خبرته
American University in Beirut.
المعلمين في اللغة الإنجليزية بصفتها المهنية، كما تشمل تصميم البرامج
So his subject will be linguistic transformation in the Arabian Gulf and its impact on local and regional identity.
اللغوي والتحفيز والتقييم والتعلم التعاوني في تدريس اللغة الإنجليزية. وعنوان ورقته هو التحول اللغوي في دول الخليج العربية وتأثيره في الهوية المحلية والإقليمية.
Good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm sorry I am going to speak in English and I'll try to stick to time.
Try.
My introductory remarks is that I will start with people in the Gulf area have felt that there was no genuine development and innovation after years of independence and a huge expenditure. The reform initiatives. They cannot see it?
It's not on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The reform initiatives that were taken, whether in education or economics or socially, were always plagued by problems dooming them to failures. Localized rather than holistic and comprehensive planning resulted in meager outcome for enormous efforts. Actually, in fact, if you look at one example would be the Arabic language. We always hear all kind of beautiful announcements. المجلس الدولي للغة العربية was established in Beirut in 2007. They had one of the most ambitious plans. Year after year, you could see they cut, and now it's just a celebratory event every year is held in Dubai. So we talk on a general level, but in fact, we act locally, and since there is no coordination, we don't do a good job. There is failure of planners to control the contextual variables that could hinder implementation. One good example is what happened in Qatar with the education for a new era. It started really nice. It followed international benchmarks. However, the planners forgot that there are people who have to implement those beautiful plans, teachers who are going to teach science and math in English, who themselves did not know English, teachers who needed to be trained in the new curriculum. They were trained for a few days and then thrown into the market. In reality, what happened afterwards is a mess. And in 2011, there was the tests that were developed by the Higher Education Council, discovered that students were doing bad in English, doing bad in Arabic, doing bad in math, doing bad in science. And the government at the time took the decision to go back to Arabic. I will start by talking about the sociolinguistic diversity in the Gulf area. First of all, we have diaglossia, which mainly means the presence of standard Arabic, modern standard Arabic, alongside the vernaculars in all the Arab countries. Then there is multilingualism, and this is here in the area amazing because it's not just Arabic and a foreign language, it's Arabic and many, many foreign languages spoken by the expats. There is also a tendency towards more diversification. I'm talking about new trends that we know of. There is a Gulf Pidgin Arabic developing. You know, Pidgin is a reduced form of two languages, between two languages. And in the case of the area here, it's mainly between the unskilled labor, because these people don't know English and haven't learned Arabic, and they have to talk to the locals. In Lebanon, something like that was called Madame Pidgin, because it's basically domestic help, and the lady of the house gives the maid orders: do this, do that. Only verbs and nouns, verbs and nouns. No more, no prepositions, no adjectives, no adverbs, and so on. There is also social media Arabic, which unfortunately is not even written in Arabic orthography. It's written in Latin orthography, what people know as Arabizi or Franco-Arabic, where even they have created for the Arabic sounds that are not found in English, they added numbers. And in addition, you have the emoticons, the abbreviations, the borrowings, the code switching. So many things are happening in the sociolinguistic scene in this area. I start with standard Arabic. Despite the fact that many people think that standard Arabic has not changed, it's the language of the Quran, it hasn't changed much. In reality, it did change. Standard Arabic, people still think of it as the language of the Quran, the language of pre-Islamic poetry, the language of science and philosophy in the Ma'mun's era and in Andalus, the language of media, literature, and social sciences after the 19th century Renaissance. Arabic, however, despite what people say and all the calls you hear about endangered language, the threats to Arabic from all sources, the conspiracies against Arabic, Arabic is still an official language in 23 countries. It's an identity symbol for young Arabs, and I did review many research articles in which learners who are learning English or French as a foreign language, when asked about Arabic as an identity symbol, they showed great attachment to Arabic. They think of going into a foreign language only as a utilitarian, practical move, but the symbol of identity would always remain Arabic. Arabic nowadays is a media language. Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, even France 24 and Sky and so on. There are so many satellite networks that use Arabic. However, it's not really 100% standard Arabic. It is a mixed Arabic, and this is part of the tendency, this is part of the transformations that are taking place. Arabic is thriving in Islamic countries as a language of the Quran. People learn it as a second language in order to read the Quran and learn about Islam. Arabic also remains a pan-Arab language. If you go from the Gulf to Morocco and you have difficulty communicating with them, you resort to standard Arabic. Arabic is a UN language, one of 6 UN languages, And Arabic is a foreign language in schools and universities all over the world. In the United States, after 9/11, the jump was enormous, like 15 times the number of students that they used to have before. So I think Arabic, despite all the calls we hear about its death and so on, is there to stay. Arabic vernaculars, that means the dialect, العامي, اللهجات. These are the language of everyday communication and self-expression. If you get upset, it's easier to start shouting and screaming in your native spoken dialect. It is the native tongue of Arab children. Classical Arabic is learned at school. It's the working language in most Arab school classrooms, especially in the teaching of science and math. That's supposed to take place in English or French. All studies done on what happens in the class, you have translanguaging, what we call translanguaging. And even actually in Arabic, in the teaching of Arabic grammar, teachers use the dialects. Language varieties with their own systems, and they are not corrupted forms of the standard as people believe. The Arabic vernacular's vitality, they have evolved, developed, borrowed, and created new terms and forms of expression. The dialects are vital, they are essential, and we need them. And in my opinion, they are not, there is no dichotomy like the diaglossia concept says. It's a continuum. Nowadays, there is a continuum. And I think the best example in the middle is educated Arabic, the language spoken on university campuses, for example, is a very good example of an Arabic that draws on both dialects and the classical. It serves new communicative functions in news media, reporting, and commentaries in the entertainment industry and children's programs. So basically, what the vernaculars did, they took over some of the functions of standard Arabic, but so did foreign languages. And again, as long as people separate these functions and don't think that Arabic is weakening, which it's not, I hope, then it should not be a big issue. We shouldn't make big issues out of natural occurrences in any linguistic context. It's mixed with standard written work, such as poetry, plays, and fiction, as part of a growing tendency all over the Arab world. You know, Najib Mahfouz used to write his dialogues in his novels in Egyptian Arabic. And this is becoming a tendency. I don't know whether you are familiar with this new, really very good poet in Egypt, Hisham al-Jukh. He has poems, half in the dialect and half in classical Arabic, and it doesn't feel odd. The amazing thing, it doesn't feel odd, and people react in a really supportive way when he reads. Inter-Arab conflicts enhanced status of vernaculars as local nationalistic symbols. You know, we were talking about pan-Arab nationalism. We were talking before about a Gulf, the development of a Gulf economic union, of a Gulf linguistic standard. In reality, these attempts, I think, are failing, and we are going into, because of political conflicts, we are going into more disintegration, including linguistic disintegration. There's a paper by somebody who works at the institute here who talks about the revival of the Qatari dialect, and it's partly as a reaction to what happens. Now people would say what happened in 2017 is odd. It was not really odd. Anybody who was watching what's going on in the politics in the Arab world and in the Gulf in particular would notice that the undercurrents of conflicts only they came to the surface all of a sudden. And we have now we have all these differences and all these nationalistic tendencies at the level of each country. So instead of pan-Arabism, pan-Gulf, we are going into local nationalism. And I think in the long run, it's really dangerous for all the Arab world. Arabic and identity. In the old days, Arabic was the main element of identity. I heard the French Orientalist Jacques Burke says the Arabic language is the identity of the Arabs. And Dr. Yasser Sulaiman, is famous for his excellent writings on Arab nationalism and the role of the language in it. Using English as EFL and more recently as EMI, English as a medium of instruction, is bound to cause a devaluation of Arabic in the eyes of its speakers, or an outright rejection of EMI, as was the case in Qatar. The language failed as an identity. The Arabic language has always been the main pillar of identity. I think it has failed. And I think religion has failed as identity. Ethnicity has failed as an identity, because we all know the tribes, the same tribes, roam all over the area, and now they cannot even see each other between one country and another. The problem with Arabic lies in the policies or lack thereof that would protect, reform, and strengthen the role of the language. I want to move into conclusions. The absence of clear and balanced language policies could result in poor academic achievement of learners in schools and universities. And really, there are no clear policies. We start well, mainly because we copy from the West. We have, everybody talks about standard base, everybody talks about benchmarking, everybody talks about learning outcomes, but on the ground, we are where we started like 30 years ago. Keeping Arabic as a medium of instruction for humanities and social sciences only is a great disservice to a language that has in the past preserved and developed the human scientific heritage. Not just preserved, but also developed. The private sector should not be prevented from using foreign languages in education and communication, but it should at the same time show a commitment to the use and development of Arabic as the language of the land. Arabic needs more than lip service from scholars and policy makers. What is needed is active engagement in reforming and modernizing the language through serious revival and implementation of the original plan of Arab language academies. If you read the original mission of مجامع اللغة العربية, they sound beautiful. None of what they said has been put into, actually instead of one Arab language academy, now we have 8 or 9. Initiatives to enhance the status and role of Arabic though commendable, need to be more inclusive, comprehensive, and applicable in the real world. References, and thank you.
شكرا دكتور قاسم. هذه الورقة قريبة إلى قلبي.
I'd like to thank Dr. Qasim. My first specialty is applied linguistic.
تبقى من الوقت ربع ساعة.
Still have 15 minutes.
نفتح المجال للأسئلة.
We open the floor for questions. We take any questions if there are any.
مين عنده الميكروفون؟
So let us see who has the microphone.
الشخص اللي آخر على اليسار، أول واحد رفع إيده. ممكن تعرف بنفسك
Please introduce yourself and then ask your
مرحبا.
question.
أنا أولا
First of all,
محمد الهاشمي طالب دكتوراه
محمد الهاشمي,
عن
PhD
شباب وبناء
student.
قدرات وطنية في قطر. لكن أولا ببدأ بكومنت لك عهود. أنت قلت لنا استمتعتي جدا في
You said you enjoyed this lecture very much.
دكتور علي.
كلهم.
أنا كنت محظوظ أكثر لأن دكتور علي قبل تقريبا 7 أو 8 سنوات خذيت كلاس عنده وكنت محظوظ كل أسبوع 3 ساعات. كنت أدرس عنده sustainable
development. I was studying sustainable development and he empowered me and motivated me. Dr. Ali, thank you so much.
عندي سؤالين معلي لو
I have
سمحت.
two
هذا اليوم
questions.
آخر اليوم بس عندي سؤالين ببدأ من دانيا. Dania, my question to you, very interesting presentation, very interesting also analysis, and very interesting. You mentioned a lot of interesting points about the relationship between the merchants and the leadership. We can call them in Kuwait. My question to you is: can we consider this relationship and the prosperity that resulted after this relationship as a form of crony capitalism or not in Kuwait? And my second question, very quickly, is to the last presenter. Do you think that the decline of Arabic language as a lingua franca between foreigners in countries like Qatar also contributed in minimizing the role of Arabic or at least weakening its presence? Thank you very much.
دكتور محمد معلي بعمل لك رياضة.
شكرا.
Thank you so much. I followed the 3 or 4 presentations. I'm very happy with what I listened to, what I followed. I'd like to thank the Arab Center for hosting this great platform to talk about identity. So I want to make a point about the Arabic language with Dr. Kassim. Actually, those deserving the Arabic language are actually the elite, and they are themselves they are talking or speaking English or French, and they are proud talking with their children in a foreign language. We see also that the Europeans are competing to open centers and institutions for teaching Arabic. The foreign minister, not Sweden, I think he means Austria. So we saw a lot of Westerners and Orientalists speaking Arabic. So I think it's strange to say that we're using dialect to use on WhatsApp and on social media. I think this is a big mistake, and we need to go back to our language because the French forbid to show any movie in French cinemas in another language different from French, and also the menus are written in restaurants are written in Arabic and even English. It's written in very small and tiny letters. The French president, as he spoke, I think, in front of the EU, he spoke in a different language than English. He was dismissed immediately. But actually, we as Arab countries, we send delegates who speak a foreign language in international platforms such as the UN and so on. So we need to stress the importance of the Arab language. Assalamu alaikum. I want to add something to what Dr. Ali said earlier. He spoke about the GCC citizen after hundreds of years. Dr. Ali spoke about the future of GCC citizens. He said that GCC citizens will queue up to apply for a visa to go to Bangladesh in 1,200. So it's around 1,852. One of the scientists in Oman, he said there was a drought at that time, and upon that there were 50 men who left one city and they went to India. So I think that this is normal. We need to view it as something normal in life. We should not prevent people from moving, and I think it's not a shame to go to another place to look for work or for better opportunity. Thank you very much. Two quick questions. First goes to Dr. Ali. The diversity and the pluralism you spoke about in Doha or in GCC countries have a lot of nice aspects, and some of them were present in your discourse. But there is also an opposite side. There is expansion and demography. So the more demographic pressure we have in GCC cities, the more or the higher the towers will get, and the more people you will need also. This is creating also a demographic problem. And actually this issue is not discussed, and maybe specialists and experts avoid to discuss this topic. So if you can comment on this. Dr. Qasim, if you can please comment on a big gap or irony or paradox to provoke Mr. Al-Misfar, but with all the due respect to our beloved doctor. The region of GCC may be the only region in the world and maybe in the universe, if we admit that there are some populations elsewhere. And if you go to Romania, for example, you learn Romanian to work and study. If you go to Argentina, you need to learn the local language. This is maybe the only region in the world where you can come, you don't need to learn the language, you can stay here maybe 10, 20 years and you haven't learned the language. Maybe you after 20 years you can say only Assalamu alaikum, that's it. Thank you very much. My question is about the city, Dr. Mahran and Dr. Ali. The impact of the quick transformation of GCC cities and its impact on identity. And also what Dr. Khaled said, the topography and the migration, the domestic migration, not only the migration from outside, from abroad. I'm talking here about the exodus, for example, from villages to the cities and domestic migration. So our countries have become countries of cities and not cities of countries, because maybe Dubai is much more famous than UAE, or Doha is much more famous than Qatar as name, or Muscat and so on. So a change of one city is affecting its picture internationally.
لكن أيضا هناك تغير لأن أيضا الهجرات الداخلية وأيضا يعني
And all this is related to domestic migration, and this brought about a change of the identity in GCC area. Rafi Attalai from Oman, but live in Qatar. A question to Dr. Mahran. I don't know. Shall I speak Arabic or English? How how do you describe GCC countries in one word? Do you think they are modern or traditional societies, and why? Dr. Ali, a great presentation. And the post identity or beyond the identity, it's a great idea. We need to think about it actually, because you spoke about diversity and pluralism, but can you tell us how are we gonna look like? Are we gonna look like USA or another provocation of Dr. Qasim? A big paradox. Dr. Qasim spoke about English and he was talking about Arabic. So what made him talk in English about Arabic? To provoke you, I think.
اوكي بناخذ 3 أسئلة فقط. اوكي مين يدفع أكثر؟ اوكي بناخذ الأستاذ هنا وبعدين هنا وبعدين الأستاذ خالد. I'm not making an exception بعدين. استفزكم بعد كلام إنجليزي.
يعني شكرا على جميع المساهمات. أنا حقيقة استمتعت.
I'd like to thank all the panelists and speakers. I have two comments. The first one relates to identity. So I don't know the details of the papers, but there is also always a polemic and a controversial discussion related to identity in the GCC, its presence and its texture and its established. If we want to compare it with other countries such as Syria and Iraq, I think they are leading the situation of the identity and the presence of GCC societies, which think that they have the same tradition, the same culture, the same language and religion. So for me, they are very much advanced, regardless of the demographic components. Talking about labor, and so I think these are only reason for a short time. The second issue relates to the way we study cities. I think this is something quite difficult. First of all, we need to define the ideological and the urbanization level of every person. Dr. Ali showed us Daphne and or West Bay, and he spoke about urbanization in Qatar. But you might have a Marxist who comes and asks you, well, why you didn't go to the industrial area? Industrial area has many more people, and they are actually those who are producing in the country, and they are providing the added value for the country. So before studying the city, and Dr. Sassan and Manuel Castan and all the contributors who studied urbanizations, we need to define what is that city. And I have a quick remark. I want to talk about social ecology. Microphone. And I think social ecology is important for us to study the situation of GCC cities because the starting point is comparison between human being and his environment, social, environmental, social and cultural environment. For example, in Qatar example, if you go to Villaggio, there was a comment on the language, but when you go to Villaggio, you found it's Italian, but in the middle of the desert, you go to the Pearl, you find it something different. So the urbanization logic is in contradiction with its environment, and this is a very sensitive. This means a destruction for the culture, for different aspects.
ممكن بس إذا في سؤال تسأله لأنه إحنا خلص الوقت.
جت عليا خلصت يعني ثلاث اسئله بشكل سريع يعني شكرا جزيلا خليل عنان رئيس برنامج العلوم السياسيه في معهد الدوحه. انا عندي ثلاث اسئله مباشره.
I have three
لمهران
quick questions
علي
to Mahran, Dr. Ali,
مهران.
Dr. Mahran.
يعني فقط عايز اعرف the political impact of this regional hub. Is there any political impact of a city like Dubai or Abu Dhabi or Doha to have political influence in the Gulf? So because you didn't touch upon this, I'd like to drag you back to your main field of political science. دكتور علي كالعاده مداخله ممتازه واكثر من رائعه.
A great presentation as usual.
علوم سياسيه نبعد بعيدا عن وننظر للابعاد الاجتماعيه.
So you spoke about the economic and social dimensions. Your approach is you're talking about the aspects from above. Can you talk about the social stratification? What is the human being with regard to all these changes and transformations? Those living in the gated communities are actually normal classes. Dr. Qasim was Ainarik. I think there are some reasons why you spoke in English. We always link identity with the language, but the language is not normally foundation of the identity. But my children might speak English, but they are loyal to their identity. Of course, the language is important, but seeing the language as the unique dimension of identity, I think this is a problem. I think time is over. I came with a different concept to this gathering. The first shock came from Dr. Mahran. He spoke in his books about society, but today he focused about the cities, about construction, and we did not focus on the human being itself. Of course, there are a lot of transformations in the GCC area. For example, today we didn't talk about three important problems, and these problems have become really a big burden. So we spoke about the Shia, Sunnah, villages and cities, and this is influencing or impacting the situation in the GCC area. I invite you to deep dive into these problems. Should not talk only about construction and material, and I think we spoke enough about this issue during the last 30 years. Therefore, I think we need to focus now on the human being. We need to activate anthropological studies, actually. Last question. What is Hassan from Qatar University? Quick comment regarding the first presentations, Dr. Mahran, Dr. Ali.
هل احنا يعني انا شايف في تباعد شويه ما بين فكره الهويه وما بين
I see that there is a kind of discrepancy between urbanization and identity. And it's something different than globalization and global city and regional rural. Are we trying to protect our identity through urbanization? Are we thinking about the era which is beyond the identity?
بنتجه للتوجه ده ولا احنا لسه
So is this the future we are aspiring for? I want to mention one verse of the Quran, which means Allah is calling on people to go in different areas in the world and to explore different areas in the world and to look for opportunities and not to be related to a specific place or location.
ام ان انا لسه مرتبط بمكان وهعيش واموت في نفس المكان. السؤال بس للدكتور قاسم.
Question to Dr. Qasim, the idea of language and also its importance and teaching it in universities. The fact of adopting the language, the Arabic language as the official language, but if the scientific production nowadays is not in Arabic, so you need to learn other languages. If we don't have translation services and cable, how can we use those publications and references? So we are relying on foreign sciences, and these are available only in a foreign language. Last question to you, Doctor. You spoke about the relation between the societies in the pre-oil era and also the relation with the leadership. Nowadays, what is the relationship between these parties? There is a large part which is very important. There are lots of global dimensions, and these dimensions are impacting the institutions we establish nowadays. So I didn't see the foreign intervention in this process, the process of establishing institutions. You spoke about England maybe one time or two times, but I don't think that this really had a big impact.
دقيقتين لكل متحدث. حاولوا تجاوبوا على الأسئلة اللي تقدروا عليها. already عدينا الوقت يعني.
All right, thank you. Very quickly, domestic migration within the GCC. Historically, Middle East cities have been very segregated along ethnic, religious, and tribal lines, and GCC cities have been no exception. What we're seeing as a result of choice, as a result of government policy and economic preferences, is in the GCC and integration of the cities. So, for example, you have some neighborhoods in which some tribes are concentrated within the city or some extended kin group, but they also have second residences. They have a villa in one of the reclaimed land areas, or they have an apartment in a tower. So that's a really good point. The question about modernity and tradition, I think in some ways that binary doesn't necessarily hold in relation to the GCC, modernity and tradition. There is some sort of hybrid identity that is emerging. Because GCC countries are so easy to govern because of demographic size and the fabric of the political system, I think in many ways state leaders have been able to play a very influential and consequential role in shaping people's identity. And so, for example, we see public art, Qatar, elsewhere, and identity here in the region has been subject to dynamics that are different, for example, in places like Egypt or Iran or elsewhere. Social ecology, there was a discussion about social ecology. I think that's quite important. Yes, one's relationship with their surrounding environment tends to be very important. There was a very important question about the political impact of regional hubs. When I actually started doing this research, that's what drove me to look at the cities, because up until 2013, 2014, Qatar was trying to shape the destiny of the region. Then after 2015, it was Abu Dhabi that now thinks they can shape the destiny of the region. So there's this hubris, this sense of false pride that comes with these big buildings where political leaders think they can shape the destiny of a country like Egypt or Syria or Iraq or now Yemen or whatever. The problem is that these countries become subject to their own false pride, and so either they discover that they cannot get involved in Syria and Libya and they need to back down, or they get caught in the quagmire that is today's Yemen. So I think you ask a very important question. Dr. Khaled pointed to the importance of the human dimension. I couldn't agree with you more, but that of course is important. But I think it's also important to ask, what does Doha mean 50 years from now? Is it going to be an empty shell, or is it going to be a regional hub? What does Abu Dhabi mean? What does the UAE mean in terms of larger human history? I think the question that you point to is incredibly important, but I think there are other dimensions. And then the discrepancy between urbanization and identity. Are we protecting identity through urbanism? This is, I think, very important, because in the 2000s, in the 1990s and the 2000s, there was this wholesale embracing by local policymakers and local rulers of whatever was modern. Then, now there's been a rediscovery of tradition. Actually, it's a reinvention of a politically influenced interpretation of tradition. So, for example, we have the desert rose that now symbolizes the Qatar National Museum. Now, I think there's a legitimate question to ask, to what extent does this desert rose represent Qatari tradition, heritage, culture? But somebody somewhere decided that it does. And so I think, yes, I think you ask a very, very important question. And I think that is also something that we need to discuss. Maybe next year.
Sorry.
Now you're in the hot.
فأنا مبدئيا هشكر أخي من عمان والدكتور
I'd like to
خالد
thank
والدكتور
my
عائشة.
colleagues from Oman, Dr. Khalid, Dr. Aisha, Dr. Rafia, Dr. Rafiq, Mu'taz.
خلي ردي يعني قضايا أكثر منها رد مباشر على كل تساؤل. أنا اعتقدت إن الهدف الأساسي
I thought the main objective and the backbone of my paper presented with the collaboration of Adil, we want to go beyond the fact that the city is only about places and locations. We wanted to talk about a human being. That's why I spoke about the topic of beyond the identity. We found out in the recent years, especially in the last year, that the local identity is collapsing. The regional GCC identity is getting apart, and we cannot keep up and catch up with the international identity. And also the Islamic identity is undergoing a big crisis. Another important dimension, when we say the GCC countries have 10 or 15% locals and 85 or 90% expat, the paper rejects this analysis because this is against the identity. We need to go beyond dividing the GCC society into a local or a citizen and an expat. I think this division might be accepted somehow now, but in the future this won't be acceptable if we want to see a real future for GCC cities. The paper is not superficial, it's not talking only about the image of the city, it's not a visual picture alone, but it focuses on different things. I spoke about public spaces in Bahrain, how these public spaces become a traffic complex or problem, or the way we deal with labor, because we know that they are in the region of only on temporary basis. Therefore, we call through this paper to put an end to this situation of non pertaining to the country. So you can reside here 5, 10, 20 years, and your suitcases are always ready if you want to leave, and this can never give you a feeling of belonging to that area. Thank you. I'll try to be very brief. First of all, I spoke English. As you say, you saw. So I didn't know that I can choose a language for my presentation. So all my communication with the center was in English. That's why I said that yes, I can speak English. And when I was preparing this paper, at the end of the paper, I discovered that I could have written this also in Arabic, but that was too late. So my position says that we really need to use Arabic as in education, as a language of culture, civilization, but I cannot turn my back to reality. There is a general feeling among people, among all people, which says if you want to see your children in good positions and to gain good knowledge, so they need to study in English. And there was a test conducted in Beirut in the Association of Al-Maqasid. The responsible started teaching sciences in Arabic, and the experiment took 10 years. After 10 years, they stepped back from that experiment, although the results were 100% for the Arabic language. And Tamam Salam, he was the director of the association. He held a press conference and he said, today I'm gonna talk about the most difficult decision I took in my life. We used the Arabic language and the usage was very successful, but we lost half of our students, and we shut down more than 25 schools alone in Beirut. So there are a lot of facts and on the ground. As we heard repeatedly, the families or the parents reject to teach their children Arabic, and they are proud to talk with their children in English or in either foreign language. This is the situation of language. They know that teaching children in a foreign language, of course, this has a lot of impact on social classes. This is also against the logic, because we know that wealthy children, they go to elite schools which focus on using foreign languages, and poor or vulnerable classes go to different schools. Of course, there are a lot of disparities and discrepancies in this regard, and this might lead also to a revolution. And we witnessed also a lot of revolutions because of economic situation. And regarding identity and the impact of language, so I'm not linking identity with the language alone. Identity is related to different factors, and among them is the language and the race, religion. also the common history,
ومنها الطموحات
the aspirations or the common aspirations.
المجتمع مقسوم في طموحاته بسبب
If society is divided at the level of its aspirations because of the current situation, this is not going to help the issue of the language.
كيف ندرس اللغة العربية
How shall we teach Arabic? Well,
كنت أقول
this is what I spoke about. If we go back to the مجمع اللغة العربية, which is the Arabic Academy, or the Academy of the Arabic Language, so they were looking for translating sciences. The same what happened as what happened in the era of Al-Ma'mun and in Indonesia. The Spaniards were coming or going to churches to learn Arabic and to read books in Arabic, books about different sciences, and some of the Arab intellectuals are actually responsible for the translation movement, and they are translating, trivial issues. They are not translating what society needs. So they speak about translation. Yes, translation is important. The other issue is we need to encourage writing in this. Maybe this is helpful only when there is an award to get the Sheikh Zayed Award or King Faisal Award and so on. I think we need to do more. For example, in Qatar, after going to Arabic, there is a project, and I hope that it's gonna be successful. In Qatar University, many professors who are teaching international relations and management, they were asked to write and publish in Arabic. I was serving in Qatar University, and I asked a computer science professor, why you are teaching in English. He said the last book about international relations was in Arabic, and that was in 1980. So we cannot still use the same book for 2018. Therefore, Qatar University asked its professors to write and publish books. And the management said, yes, if the students want to have publications in English, we can have it, but we can have like two levels. One is Arabic and the other one is English. You know, also in Qatar, a lot of families, they don't like to go back to the Arab language as education medium, so they prefer that their children go for English.
Okay, on that note, I'm going to speak in English. Okay, to answer some of the questions, which I only got two, but is the relationship between the merchants and the state have some element of crony capitalism? Yes, undeniably. But the level varies from country to country, even though it's omnipresent. There's also a point that I would like to make is it's not necessarily good or bad. I mean, there's some good elements that came out of the relationship of the merchants and the state, and there were also some negative ones. I mean, Kuwait is a prime example that in that era, it was actually Kuwait was very influential, and whatever role the merchants played did spread throughout the region. However, today, as I mentioned, Kuwait's institutions have kind of rescinded in development, even though the merchants do remain very strong. And one striking case that was very interesting for me when looking at this. All the way in the Asia Pacific, Japan, after the World War, was devastated, and the equivalent of a merchant class there, were completely eliminated. And what happened was they were on the forefront of innovation because there was not what you would arguably say crony capitalism. So it's not necessarily true that the existence of merchants mean that development is going to move forward in a progressive manner. Now, when you look at Korea, which is a comparative country, the merchant class is there, and Korea did develop very well as an innovative economy, but not to the extent of Japan, arguably. So now the same thing, you can come back and look at Qatar and Kuwait. Qatar and Kuwait have a different domestic political landscapes, and you see that the merchants play a stronger role in Kuwait, and they don't as much in Qatar. I mean, Qatar has developed very well, I mean, right now on the global stage. But Kuwait, obviously has its place among the Gulf countries to be on the forefront of development and a lot of issues, and one of them is freedom. So, I mean, like I said, it's in between. It could be good or it could be bad. Depends on which angle you look at it. And then you asked me about the relationship between these parties and the global dimensions. I mean, this was actually from a broader project, so I was really focusing on the historical aspect. From the global perspective and the historical aspect, obviously the British played a huge role in shaping the institutions. And you see different levels of their participation in this process. And they were very involved in Bahrain, less involved but still involved in Kuwait, and absent in Qatar. And that made a huge difference also in their institutions. In reference to a global role today, I mean, if you look at some of the merchants, certain multinational companies do give certain merchants exclusive access to certain brands of cars and other things, and that does affect their economic power and leverage. And I guess it depends on who's giving them access to those multinational brands, and that will shape like the trajectory of how things develop based on that.
At the end, I'd like to thank all the speakers and panelists, and sorry if we took more time than expected, and I wish you a very nice evening in Doha. Thank you.